The soothing sound of waves crashing against the shore created a serene backdrop, but there was nothing peaceful about the woman lying unconscious in the grand room of the seaside mansion. Her face bore deep scars, and her body was riddled with bruises and wounds that told the story of a traumatic past she couldn't remember. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, adjusting to the soft sunlight streaming through the sheer curtains that swayed with the ocean breeze. A kind-faced elderly woman leaned over her, gasping when she noticed the woman stirring. "She's awake!" the old woman exclaimed as she hurried out of the room. Moments later, a nurse in a neat scrub suit entered briskly, carrying a medical kit. The nurse approached the woman with a gentle smile. "Good afternoon, Mississippi. How are you feeling?" she asked, checking the woman's blood pressure and vitals. The woman tried to speak, but her throat was dry, and her voice came out as a whisper. "In my face, it hurts," she murmured, wincing as she touched the bandage covering her cheek. "You've been through a lot," the nurse said softly, "but you're safe now. We'll take care of you." The woman's gaze roamed the room, a spacious and tastefully decorated chamber filled with antique furniture and gilded mirrors. The bed she lay on was enormous, draped with crisp white sheets. She could see the ocean beyond the open terrace doors, the scent of salt and sand filling the air. "Where am I?" she asked weakly. "You're on an island in Romblon," the nurse replied as she adjusted the foredrip. The woman's forehead creased in confusion. "Romblon? How did I get here?" She paused, her voice trembling as fear crept into her tone. "And who am I?" The nurse's hands stilled, and her kind expression faltered slightly. "You don't remember?" The woman shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I don't even know my name. Who am I? What happened to me?" The elderly woman stepped forward, her voice calm and soothing. "Relax, child. You've been through something terrible. You need to rest." But rest was the last thing on her mind. Gripping the old woman's arm, she sobbed uncontrollably. "Please, tell me who I am. Why can't I remember anything?" Her cries echoed through the mansion, and before long, they caught the attention of someone outside the room. A deep baritone voice cut through the commotion as a tall man entered the room. "What's going on here?" The woman's tear-streaked face turned toward the doorway. Standing there was a man who looked as though he had stepped out of a dream or a nightmare. His sharp jawline, piercing gray eyes, and confident posture exuded authority. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing muscular forearms. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Do you know who I am?" The man approached her slowly, his intense gaze never leaving hers. He gestured for the nurse and the elderly woman to leave the room, and they obeyed without question. Once they were alone, he pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down. "You don't remember me?" he asked, his voice low and steady. She shook her head, panic flashing in her wide eyes. "I don't even know my own name," she admitted, her voice cracking. "Please, if you know who I am, tell me." His lips curved into a faint smile, though there was a hint of sadness in his expression. "You're Quinnie," he said softly. "Quinnie?" she repeated, testing the unfamiliar name. "Is that my name?" He nodded. "Yes, Quinnie Smirnov." "Smirnov," she murmured, her brows furrowing. "And you? Who are you?" His smile widened slightly, though his gray eyes seemed darker now. "I'm Crispin Smirnov." Her confusion deepened. "Smirnov again? Are we siblings?" Crispin chuckled, the sound deep and rich. "No, Quinnie, we're not siblings." He leaned closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "We're married." Quinnie's breath hitched. Married? To this man? The revelation only added to the whirlwind of emotions she was feeling. Quinnie stared at Crispin, her mind racing. She searched his face for any flicker of recognition, but all she felt was a strange mix of curiosity and unease. "If we're married," she began hesitantly, "why can't I remember anything? What happened to me?" Crispin's jaw tightened, and for a moment, He looked as though he was debating how much to tell her. "You were in an accident," he said finally. "A car crash. You've been unconscious for weeks." A car crash? She tried to summon the memory, but her mind was a blank slate. "Don't force yourself to remember," Crispin said gently. "It'll come back to you in time. For now, just focus on getting better." Quinnie's gaze dropped to her hands, which rested on the pristine white sheets. I don't feel like myself," she admitted. "I don't even recognize my own reflection." Crispin's expression softened. He reached out and placed a reassuring hand on hers. "You've been through something unimaginable, Quinnie, but you're strong. You'll get through this." She looked up at him, her lips trembling. "Why do you care so much? Do you love me?" Crispin's eyes darkened, and a shadow crossed his face. He didn't answer right away, and the silence stretched between them. "I care about you," he said finally. "That's all that matters right now." But his evasive answer only left her with more questions. Quinnie sat on the edge of the antique bed as the nurse came in to check on her wounds. Her thoughts swirled like a storm, and the man named Crispin lingered in her mind. She had no memories of him, yet his presence unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. Was he truly her husband? If so, why did she feel a void instead of love? Her hand moved instinctively to her face, brushing against the bandage covering the scar on her cheek. The nurse gently stopped her. "You're healing well, Mrs. Smirnov," the nurse said with a warm smile. "Please," Quinnie said, her voice trembling. "Don't call me that. It doesn't feel right." The nurse hesitated but eventually nodded, respecting her request. Later that evening, Quinnie sat alone in her room, staring at the moonlit ocean through the open terrace doors. The sound of the waves was calming, but it wasn't enough to ease the turmoil inside her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The door creaked open, and she turned to see Crispin stepping inside. He looked immaculate, as always, dressed in a tailored black suit with his tie slightly loosened, giving him a relaxed yet powerful aura. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice low and soothing. She shook her head. "How can I sleep when I don't even know who I am?" He walked over and sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes meeting hers. "I understand how hard this is for you, Quinnie, but I promise I'll help you piece everything together. You're not alone in this." She studied his face, searching for sincerity. "If you really care, then tell me. How did we meet? How did we fall in love?" Crispin's expression faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered. "It's a long story," he said, his tone unreadable. "I'll tell you everything in time, but right now, you need to rest." Quinnie frowned. "Why do I feel like you're hiding something from me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stood and adjusted the cufflinks on his sleeves. "Good night, Quinnie," he said before leaving the room. As the door clicked shut behind him, Quinnie's unease deepened. She couldn't put her finger on it, but something about Crispin didn't add up. The next morning, Quinnie woke to the sound of birds chirping outside her window. The golden sunlight streamed into the room, but the warmth it brought did little to chase away the cold feeling of uncertainty in her heart. She decided to explore the mansion, hoping to find clues about her life, or at least distract herself from the chaos in her mind. The halls were grand, lined with paintings and ornate furniture that spoke of wealth and history. Yet, despite the beauty, the place felt suffocating. As she wandered, she noticed the way the staff avoided her gaze. They would bow respectfully but quickly scurry away, as though they were afraid to speak to her. It only fueled her suspicion that something wasn't right. Quinnie's steps eventually led her to a locked door at the end of a dim corridor. She reached for the doorknob, but before she could turn it, a voice startled her. "You shouldn't be here." She spun around to see Crispin standing behind her, his expression unreadable. "Why is this door locked?" she asked, her tone defensive. "It's my study," he replied curtly. "There's nothing in there that concerns you." "Why are you so secretive, Crispin? Don't I have a right to know what's going on in my own home?" "This is your home," he said, his voice firm. But there are boundaries, Quinnie. Please respect them. Frustrated, but unwilling to push further, she nodded reluctantly and walked away. But her curiosity was far from satisfied. What was he hiding behind that door? Later that day, as Quinnie sat on the terrace overlooking the ocean, a maid brought her a tray of tea and snacks. She thanked the maid politely, but the woman didn't respond. Instead, she cast a nervous glance at the door and hurried away. Quinnie sighed and reached for the tea when she heard a faint buzzing sound. She followed the noise to a drawer in the bedside table and opened it to find a phone. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The screen displayed an incoming call from an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end, followed by a deep sigh. "Quinnie," a male voice finally said. It wasn't Crispin's. Her heart raced. "Who is this?" "Quinnie, it's me, Rennie." The name meant nothing to her, but the urgency in the man's voice sent a chill down her spine. "I don't know who you are," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't remember anything." "They told me you were dead," Rennie said, his voice cracking with emotion. "But you're alive. I don't know what's going on, but you need to get out of there. You're in danger." Before she could respond, the call disconnected. Quinnie stared at the phone in disbelief. Who was Rennie, and why did he think she was in danger? That evening, Quinnie decided she couldn't keep her suspicions to herself any longer. When Crispin came to check on her, she confronted him. "Who is Rennie?" she asked, holding up the phone. Crispin's expression darkened, and he took the phone from her hand. "Where did you get this?" "It doesn't matter," she said. "What matters is that someone called me and said I'm in danger. Is it true? Am I in danger?" Crispin's jaw tightened. "Quinnie, you don't need to worry about anything. I'm here to protect you." "Protect me from what?" she demanded. "Why won't you tell me the truth? What are you hiding?" His gray eyes softened, and he reached out to cup her face. "You've been through enough, Quinnie. Let me take care of you." But his tender gesture only made her feel more conflicted. She wanted to trust him, but her instincts told her there was more to the story than he was letting on. Quinnie couldn't sleep that night. The phone call from Rennie played over and over in her mind, and Crispin's evasive answers only deepened her suspicion. She felt trapped in a life she didn't recognize, with a husband who seemed to care for her but refused to be honest. In the dead of night, she crept out of her room, her heart pounding as she made her way through the darkened halls. She didn't have a plan. She just needed answers. Her steps led her back to the locked door of Crispin's study. This time, the door was slightly ajar. Quinnie hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. The room was dimly lit, with papers and books strewn across a massive oak desk. She noticed a photograph on the desk and picked it up. It was a picture of Crispin with a woman who looked eerily familiar. "Quinnie," a voice said behind her. She spun around, clutching the photograph to her chest. Crispin stood in the doorway, his expression a mix of anger and disappointment. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. "I'm trying to understand," she said, holding up the photograph. "Who is this woman? Why does she look like me?" Crispin's eyes darkened as he took a step closer. "That's enough, Quinnie. You shouldn't be here." "Why won't you tell me the truth?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "I deserve to know who I am." Crispin sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "That woman is someone from my past. She has nothing to do with you." "Then why do I feel like she does?" Quinnie asked, tears streaming down her face. Crispin didn't answer. Instead, he took the photograph from her hand and placed it back on the desk. "Go back to your room, Quinnie. This conversation is over." The next morning, Quinnie awoke with a heavy heart. She felt as though the walls of the mansion were closing in on her, suffocating her with unanswered questions. She decided to take matters into her own hands. While Crispin was away in a meeting, Quinnie searched the mansion for clues. She eventually found herself in the library, a grand room filled with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. As she browsed the shelves, she came across a locked cabinet. She searched for the key, her hands trembling with determination. After what felt like hours, she found it hidden in a drawer. She unlocked the cabinet and discovered a stack of files. One file caught her attention. It was labeled Quinnie Smirnov. Her hands shook as she opened the file. Inside were documents about her life, birth certificates, marriage certificates, medical records, but something didn't feel right. The details were inconsistent, as though someone had fabricated parts of her identity. "What are you doing?" Quinnie gasped and turned to see Crispin standing in the doorway, his face a mask of fury. "You're spying on me now?" he asked, his voice cold. "I'm trying to understand my life," she cried. "I found this file, Crispin. Why does it feel like my entire identity is a lie?" Crispin strode over and grabbed the file from her hands. "You shouldn't have done this, Quinnie." "Why?" she demanded. "What are you so afraid of me finding out?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked out of the room, leaving Quinnie feeling more alone than ever. Quinnie spent the rest of the day in her room, her mind racing with questions. That evening, she heard a knock at her door. "Come in," she said, expecting to see Crispin. Instead, a young maid entered, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "Mrs. Smirnov," she whispered, "I need to talk to you." "What is it?" Quinnie asked, her curiosity piqued. "There's someone who wants to meet you," the maid said. "He says he knows you." Quinnie's heart raced. "Who is it?" The maid hesitated. "He said his name is Rennie." Quinnie's breath caught in her throat. "Where is he?" "He's waiting by the beach," the maid said. "But you have to be careful. If Mr. Smirnov finds out, I'll handle Crispin," Quinnie said, cutting her off. "Take me to him." Under the cover of darkness, the maid led Quinnie to the beach. The sound of the waves was deafening, but it couldn't drown out the pounding of her heart. She saw a figure standing near the water, his silhouette illuminated by the moonlight. As she approached, the man turned to face her. "Quinnie," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Rennie," she whispered. He nodded and took a step closer. "I can't believe it's really you. They told me you were gone." Quinnie stared at him, trying to piece together fragments of memories that refused to surface. "I don't remember you," she admitted, tears in her eyes. "I don't remember anything." "It's okay," Rennie said, his voice gentle. "I'm here now. I'll help you remember." Before she could respond, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Crispin storming toward them, his face twisted with rage. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. "Crispin, Get away from her," Crispin said, cutting her off. He grabbed Quinnie's arm and pulled her behind him, shielding her from Rennie. "You have no right to keep her here," Rennie said, his voice steady. "She doesn't belong with you." "She's my wife," Crispin shot back. "She doesn't even remember you," Rennie retorted. Quinnie felt trapped between the two men, their voices growing louder and more hostile. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all she could do was stand there, overwhelmed and confused. After the confrontation, Crispin dragged Quinnie back to the mansion. He didn't say a word as he led her to her room and shut the door behind them. "Who is he?" Quinnie asked, breaking the silence. "He's no one," Crispin said, his voice cold. "That's not true," she said, her voice trembling. "He knows me. He called me Quinnie. Why won't you tell me the truth?" Crispin's expression softened for a moment, and she thought he might finally open up, but then his eyes hardened again. "You don't need to know everything right now," he said. "Just trust me." "How can I trust you when you keep lying to me?" she shot back. Crispin didn't answer. He simply turned and left the room, leaving Quinnie alone with her thoughts. As she lay in bed that night, she couldn't stop thinking about Rennie's words. Did she belong with him? And if so, why was Crispin so desperate to keep her by his side? The tension in the mansion was palpable after the confrontation on the beach. Crispin avoided Quinnie, retreating to his study for hours at a time. Meanwhile, Quinnie's mind was plagued by Rennie's words. Who was she really? Why couldn't she remember anything about her life before the accident? Determined to find answers, Quinnie began piecing together small details from her interactions with Crispin. His demeanor was kind yet distant, and his protectiveness often felt more like possession than love. The locked doors, the hidden files, and the way the staff seemed hesitant to speak freely only fueled her suspicion that she was being kept in the dark. One afternoon, while Crispin was out on business, Quinnie wandered into the garden. The fresh air helped clear her mind, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She turned around and spotted a maid quickly averting her gaze. "Wait," Quinnie called out, approaching the young woman. "Yes, Mrs. Smirnov?" the maid replied, her voice trembling. "Please, tell me the truth," Quinnie pleaded. "Do you know anything about my past?" The maid hesitated, her eyes darting around nervously. I'm sorry, ma'am. Mr. Smirnov has instructed us not to speak about certain matters." "What matters?" Quinnie pressed. "Why won't he tell me who I really am?" Before the maid could answer, Crispin's voice boomed from behind them. "That's enough," he said, his tone icy. The maid quickly scurried away, leaving Quinnie alone with Crispin. "What were you asking her?" he demanded, his gray eyes narrowing. "I deserve to know the truth, Crispin," Quinnie said, standing her ground. "Why won't you tell me about my life before the accident?" "You're not ready for the truth," he said curtly. "Stop digging, Quinnie. It's for your own good." "But Enough," he snapped, his voice rising. "Drop this, or I'll have no choice but to take measures to protect you from yourself." Quinnie felt a chill run down her spine. His words were both a warning and a threat, and she realized that the man she thought was her husband might not be the person he appeared to be. Later that night, Quinnie couldn't sleep. Crispin's words echoed in her mind, and she felt more determined than ever to uncover the truth. She remembered what Rennie had said on the beach, that she didn't belong with Crispin. She decided to contact Rennie again. With the help of the same maid who had taken her to him before, she managed to slip out of the mansion undetected. When she arrived at the agreed-upon meeting spot near the cliffs, Rennie was already waiting. "Quinnie," he said, his expression softening when he saw her. "I need answers," she said, her voice trembling. "Who am I, Rennie? What is Crispin hiding from me?" Rennie hesitated, as though debating whether to tell her the truth. Finally, he took a deep breath and said, "Your name is Quinnie Castellanos. You're not married to Crispin. He lied to you." Quinnie's heart sank. "What do you mean?" "He's using you," Rennie continued. "You were in an accident, yes, but it wasn't a random one. Crispin orchestrated it to keep you here, under his control." "No," Quinnie whispered, shaking her head. "That can't be true." "It is," Rennie insisted. "I've been looking for you ever since you disappeared. You don't belong here, Quinnie. You belong with me." Tears filled Quinnie's eyes as she tried to process his words. Could Crispin really be capable of such deceit? And if Rennie was telling the truth, why couldn't she remember him or her life before the accident? Quinnie returned to the mansion, her mind racing with everything Rennie had told her. She felt sick at the thought of confronting Crispin, but she knew she couldn't keep living in the dark. The next morning, she found Crispin in the dining room, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper as if everything were normal. "Crispin," she said, her voice shaking. He looked up, his expression softening when he saw her. "Good morning, Quinnie. Did you sleep well?" "No," she said, her tone firm. "We need to talk." Crispin put down the newspaper and gestured for her to sit. "What's on your mind?" "I spoke to Rennie again," she said, watching his reaction closely. His jaw tightened, and his eyes darkened. "You shouldn't have done that." "Is it true?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Am I not really your wife? Did you lie to me about everything?" Crispin sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Quinnie, it's not that simple." "Then explain it to me," she demanded. He hesitated, as if weighing his options. Finally, he said, "Yes, you're not my wife. But everything I've done was to protect you." "Protect me from what?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "From Rennie," Crispin said, his voice filled with conviction. "He's not the man you think he is. He's dangerous, Quinnie. I couldn't let him take you away from me." Quinnie stared at him, her mind reeling. She didn't know who to believe anymore. Quinnie felt like a prisoner in the mansion. Crispin's confession had only deepened her mistrust, and she knew she couldn't stay there any longer. With the help of the maid who had been secretly aiding her, she began planning her escape. The maid provided her with a map of the island and a small bag of supplies. "You'll need to leave at night," the maid whispered. "It's the only time the security is lax." "What about Crispin?" Quinnie asked, her heart pounding. "He rarely leaves his study after dinner," the maid said. "You'll have a small window to get away." That night, Quinnie waited until the mansion was quiet before slipping out of her room. She moved silently through the halls, her heart racing with every step. When she reached the front door, she paused, half expecting Crispin to appear and stop her. But the door remained closed, and the mansion was eerily silent. She stepped outside and made her way toward the cliffs, where Rennie was waiting with a boat. "You came," Rennie said, relief evident in his voice. "I don't know who to trust anymore," Quinnie admitted, "but I can't stay here." "You're doing the right thing," Rennie said, helping her into the boat. As they sailed away from the island, Quinnie couldn't help but look back at the mansion, her heart heavy with doubt and fear. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The salty breeze stung Quinnie's face as the small boat moved farther from the island. Rennie sat across from her, his expression torn between relief and determination. Quinnie, however, was consumed by a whirlwind of emotions: fear, confusion, and a growing sense of unease. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rennie looked at her, his eyes softening. "First, we need to get you somewhere safe. Crispin won't let you go without a fight." The mention of Crispin sent a shiver down her spine. Despite everything, she couldn't erase the memory of his piercing gray eyes and the intensity of his words. Had he been lying to her this entire time? Or was Rennie the one twisting the truth? As the boat docked on a remote part of the mainland, Rennie helped Quinnie onto the shore. He had arranged a car to take them to a safe house, a modest but secluded cabin nestled deep in the forest. Inside, Rennie set down her bag and turned to her. "You'll be safe here, Quinnie. I promise." "Safe from what?" she asked, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "You keep saying Crispin is dangerous, but he told me the same thing about you. Who am I supposed to believe?" Rennie sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know it's hard, but you have to trust me. I've known you for years, Quinnie. We were close before all of this happened." "Close?" she repeated, narrowing her eyes. "Yes," Rennie said, his voice firm. "You and I were in love. Crispin took you away from me because he wanted to control you. He's obsessed with you, Quinnie. He'll do anything to keep you under his thumb." Quinnie's heart ached as she tried to make sense of his words. If that's true, then why can't I remember any of it? If we were so in love, why does it all feel like a blank slate? "I don't know," Rennie admitted, his voice laced with sorrow, "but I'll help you remember, whatever it takes." Over the next few days, Rennie did everything he could to help Quinnie recover her lost memories. He showed her photographs of them together, laughing at a beach, holding hands at a cafe, and even dancing under a string of lights. In every photo, Quinnie appeared genuinely happy. Yet, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't summon even a flicker of recognition. "Do you remember this one?" Rennie asked, holding up a picture of them at what appeared to be a wedding. Quinnie studied the image. She was wearing a pale blue dress, and Rennie stood beside her in a sharp suit. They looked like the perfect couple. "No," she said softly, shaking her head. "It's like looking at a stranger's life." Rennie's shoulders slumped, but he quickly masked his disappointment. It's okay. These things take time. As the days turned into nights, Quinnie couldn't help but feel a growing tension between her and Rennie. While he was kind and attentive, there were moments when his frustration would slip through. A clenched jaw, a sharp tone, or a fleeting look of impatience. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Quinnie decided to confront him. "Rennie, I need you to be honest with me," she said, her voice steady. "Is there something you're not telling me?" He hesitated, his gaze flickering to the flames. "What do you mean?" "You've been acting strange," she said. "I can feel it. If there's something I need to know, you have to tell me now." Rennie sighed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. I'm scared, Quinnie. I've already lost you once. I can't lose you again." His words tugged at her heart, but they didn't erase the nagging doubt in her mind. Back on the island, Crispin was far from idle. The moment he discovered Quinnie was gone, his calm facade shattered. "Find her," he ordered his security team, his voice cold and menacing. "I don't care what it takes. Bring her back to me." He locked himself in his study, poring over maps and surveillance footage in a desperate bid to track her down. His gray eyes, once filled with calculated charm, now burned with fury. "You can't hide from me, Quinnie," he muttered under his breath. Despite his anger, a part of him felt a deep ache. He hadn't intended for things to spiral out of control. All he wanted was to protect her, from Rennie, from the truth, and even from herself. As the days passed, Crispin's obsession grew. He barely slept, his mind consumed with thoughts of Quinnie. The staff tiptoed around him, fearing the wrath that simmered just beneath the surface. Late one night, Crispin received a call from one of his informants. "We found her," the man said. Crispin's grip on the phone tightened. "Where is she?" "An old cabin in the woods, just outside the city." Crispin didn't waste a second. He gathered a small team and set out to retrieve Quinnie, determined to bring her back, even if it meant confronting Rennie head-on. Quinnie was staring out the window of the cabin when she heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. Her heart leapt into her throat as she turned to Rennie. "Someone's here," she whispered. Rennie grabbed a gun from a drawer, his expression dark. "Stay behind me." The door burst open, and Crispin strode in, flanked by two of his men. His gray eyes locked onto Quinnie, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. "Quinnie," he said, his voice low and commanding, "come with me." Rennie stepped in front of her, raising the gun. "Stay back, Crispin. She's not going anywhere with you." Crispin's lips curled into a cold smile. "Do you really think you can stop me, Rennie? This is between me and her." Quinnie felt like a pawn caught between two powerful forces. Her heart raced as she looked between them, unsure of who to trust. "Both of you, stop," she cried. "I'm not going anywhere until I get the truth." "You already know the truth," Rennie said, his voice softening as he turned to her. "Crispin is lying to you." "And what about you, Rennie?" Crispin countered, his tone venomous. "Have you told her why she can't remember her past? Have you told her about the accident?" Rennie stiffened, his grip on the gun faltering. "What is he talking about?" Quinnie demanded, her voice shaking. Crispin stepped forward, his gaze locked on her. "Ask him, Quinnie. Ask him what really happened the night of the accident." The room fell silent, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Quinnie's mind swirled with questions, but one thing was clear. Her journey for the truth was far from over. The tension in the cabin was unbearable. Quinnie stood frozen between Rennie and Crispin, both men radiating fury. Crispin's piercing gray eyes never left Rennie, while Rennie's grip on the gun trembled slightly. "Someone start talking," Quinnie demanded, her voice shaking but firm. "What happened the night of the accident?" Rennie was the first to speak, his voice strained. "Quinnie, you don't need to hear this right now. You've been through enough." "No," she interrupted. "I've been in the dark for too long. I need to know the truth." Crispin stepped closer, his expression cold yet composed. The night of the accident, Rennie was driving. You were with him, Quinnie, because he convinced you to leave me. That's a lie. Rennie snapped, his voice rising. You forced her to stay with you. She wanted to leave, and you couldn't handle it. Is that why you were speeding? Crispin shot back, his voice dripping with venom. Is that why you lost control of the car? Quinnie's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded as fragments of memories began to surface. Flashes of headlights, the sound of screeching tires, and Rennie's voice yelling her name. Stop it, she cried, clutching her head as the memories overwhelmed her. I remember. The car, the crash. Her knees buckled, and Crispin was at her side in an instant, steadying her. Rennie lowered the gun, his face pale as he watched her crumble. Quinnie, Rennie said softly, his voice filled with regret. It was an accident. I never meant for it to happen. But it did, Crispin said, his tone icy. And now she's paying the price. Quinnie looked up at both men, tears streaming down her face. Why was I even in the car with you, Rennie? Why did I leave Crispin? Rennie hesitated, the weight of the question pressing down on him. Because you wanted freedom. You wanted to escape from him and the control he had over you. You loved me, Quinnie. You chose me. Crispin scoffed, his jaw tightening. She didn't choose you, Rennie. You manipulated her, just like you're trying to do now. Quinnie's mind was spinning. She didn't know who to believe or what to feel. The only thing she knew for certain was that her life had been shattered, and the pieces didn't seem to fit together anymore. Quinnie spent the next few days in a haze, retreating to her room in the cabin while Rennie and Crispin maintained an uneasy truce. Neither man wanted to leave her, but their presence only made her feel more trapped. She stared out the window, watching the rain fall in steady sheets. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within her. Rennie knocked softly on her door before stepping inside. Quinnie, can we talk? She didn't turn to face him. What is there to talk about, Rennie? My life is a mess, and I don't even know who I am anymore. You're Quinnie, he said, his voice gentle. The woman I love. The woman I've always loved. She turned to him, her eyes filled with pain. But is that the truth? Or just your version of it? Rennie sighed, running a hand through his hair. I made mistakes, Quinnie. I should have been more careful that night. But everything I did was because I cared about you. I still do. Before she could respond, Crispin appeared in the doorway. Are you seriously trying to justify what you did, Rennie? Stay out of this, Rennie snapped. No, Crispin said firmly, stepping into the room. She deserves to know that you're not the hero you're pretending to be. Quinnie held up a hand, her voice breaking. Stop, both of you, just stop. The two men fell silent, their gazes locked in a silent battle. I need space, she said, her voice trembling. I can't think with both of you hovering over me. Just leave me alone. Reluctantly, they left the room, leaving Quinnie to wrestle with the fragments of her broken memories. As the days passed, Quinnie began to notice cracks in Rennie's facade. While he was attentive and kind, there were moments when his temper flared, and his words became sharp. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Quinnie decided to confront him. Rennie, why do I feel like you're hiding something from me? His expression faltered for a moment before he forced a smile. I'm not hiding anything, Quinnie. I just want what's best for you. But what if what's best for me isn't you? She asked, her voice steady. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of desperation. Don't say that. You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough to realize that I can't trust either of you, she said, her heart heavy. Rennie stood abruptly, his fists clenched. After everything I've done for you, you're still doubting me? Before she could respond, Crispin entered the room, his expression cold and unyielding. That's enough, Rennie. She doesn't need your guilt trips. Rennie glared at him. Stay out of this, Crispin. You've done more damage than I ever could. Crispin ignored him, turning to Quinnie. Are you okay? She nodded weakly, her emotions a tangled mess. Quinnie knew she couldn't stay in the cabin forever. The longer she stayed, the more suffocated she felt. She needed answers, closure, and most of all, a chance to reclaim her life. One morning, she called both men into the living room. "I've made a decision," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. Rennie and Crispin exchanged wary glances. "I can't stay here anymore," she continued. "I need to leave. Alone." Rennie's eyes widened in alarm. "Quinnie, you can't." "Yes, I can," she interrupted. "I need to figure out who I am without either of you influencing me." Crispin's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "If that's what you want, I won't stop you." Rennie, however, wasn't as accepting. "This is insane, Quinnie. You don't even know where you'll go." "I'll figure it out," she said firmly. "I have to." As she packed her belongings, both men watched her with heavy hearts. For Crispin, it was a chance to prove that his love for her was selfless. For Rennie, it was a painful reminder that he couldn't control her. When the car arrived to take her away, Quinnie turned to face them one last time. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "for everything. But this is something I have to do on my own." With that, she stepped into the car and drove away, leaving behind the two men who had shaped her past and possibly her future. Quinnie's departure from the cabin marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was alone, free to rediscover herself without the looming shadows of Rennie or Crispin. She rented a modest apartment in the heart of a bustling city, determined to piece together the fragments of her identity. Days turned into weeks as she immersed herself in therapy, journaling, and quiet moments of introspection. One afternoon, while walking through a park, she stumbled upon a street artist painting a serene seascape. Something about the waves crashing against the rocks stirred a memory deep within her, a memory of the accident and the emotions tied to that fateful night. She approached the artist, her heart racing. "Excuse me, where is this place?" she asked, pointing at the painting. The artist smiled. "That's Sunset Cove, just a few hours from here. It's a beautiful spot, quiet and peaceful." Quinnie thanked him and decided to visit the cove. She knew instinctively that this place held answers to questions she'd been too afraid to ask. When she arrived, the sight of the crashing waves and jagged cliffs sent a chill down her spine. She stood at the edge of the shore, her feet sinking into the cool sand as flashes of her past began to surface. She remembered the argument in the car with Rennie, the way his voice had risen in frustration, and the terror that had gripped her as the car skidded out of control. But she also remembered something else, a moment of clarity in the chaos, a whispered plea for forgiveness that she couldn't quite place. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Quinnie made a silent vow to move forward, no matter how painful the journey might be. Months later, Quinnie found herself at a small cafe, sipping on a cup of tea. The scars on her face had healed, though faint traces remained, a reminder of the trials she had endured. She had changed. The timid, uncertain woman she once was had been replaced by someone stronger, more resilient. But even as she embraced her newfound independence, a part of her heart remained tethered to the two men who had shaped her past. One day, as she was flipping through the pages of an old journal, her phone buzzed. It was Crispin. "Quinnie," his deep voice said on the other end, "I'm in the city. Can we meet?" She hesitated, her heart pounding. "Okay, where?" He suggested a quiet park near her apartment, and an hour later, they were sitting on a bench beneath a canopy of trees. Crispin looked tired, his once steely demeanor softened by time. "I heard you've been doing well," he said, his voice tinged with pride. "I'm trying," she replied. "It hasn't been easy, but I'm getting there." He nodded, his gaze fixed on her. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Quinnie, for everything, for not being the husband you deserved and for the pain I caused." His words took her by surprise, but she could see the sincerity in his eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot." As they sat in silence, the weight of their shared history hung between them. Crispin reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I know I don't deserve a second chance," he began, his voice trembling, "but I want you to have this, not as a promise, but as a reminder of what we once had." He opened the box to reveal a delicate necklace with a pendant shaped like a wave. Quinnie's breath caught in her throat. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It reminded me of you," he said, strong, unyielding, and always moving forward. Before she could respond, Crispin stood. "Take care of yourself, Quinnie. You deserve all the happiness in the world." And with that, he walked away, leaving her alone once again. A week later, Quinnie received a letter in the mail. It was from Rennie. "Quinnie, not a day goes by that I don't think about you. I know I've made mistakes, more than I can count, but I need you to know that I've always loved you. If you're ever ready to talk, I'll be waiting. Rennie." She stared at the letter for a long time, her emotions a whirlwind. For the first time, she felt no anger, no resentment, only a quiet sense of closure. In the weeks that followed, Quinnie continued to focus on herself. She started painting, pouring her emotions onto canvas, and even opened a small art gallery. Her work gained recognition, and with each passing day, she felt more at peace. One evening, as she stood on the balcony of her apartment, watching the city lights twinkle, she realized something profound. Her journey had been one of love and betrayal, pain and forgiveness, but most importantly, self-discovery. She didn't need anyone else to define her. She was enough. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.